Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. Today we're talking about a serious threat that is affecting our Oklahoma ash trees. We're then looking at how we use wildflowers as a landscape solution here at the Botanic Gardens. And finally, we're digging up information on pocket gophers and moles. Stay tuned right here to Oklahoma Gardening. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Oklahoma Gardening is a proud partner with Shape Your Future, a program of the Tobacco Settlement Endowment Trust. Shape Your Future provides resources for Oklahomans to make the healthy choice the easy choice. For generations, Oklahoma Gardening has been welcomed into your homes. It's a place to learn, to grow, and be inspired. It's where Oklahoma State University bridges research, education, and passion. We share one goal: to serve the gardeners who inspire us. That's what makes Oklahoma Gardening true to Oklahoma and true to gardeners.
Today we're just outside of Tulsa, and joining me is Deiter Rudolph with the Oklahoma Forestry Services. And you probably have heard a lot about the emerald ash borer, and we're going to get it straight from the experts. Tell us what's going on and what's the concern around Tulsa.
Yeah, so emerald ash borer is an invasive beetle. Started in Eastern Asia, and it came to North America about 20-ish years ago. And so the problem with it is it's killing our ash trees. So big problem is with invasives, our trees aren't used to it, and so they have no defense. So it's able to get in and do the damage that normally a tree would defend itself from.
Right. So when did this start, and where did it start in the U.S.?
Yeah, so we first found it in early 2000s in Detroit area.
Okay.
And it's estimated it was here in the early 90s, came across in packaging materials, just crates, any type of wood that was used for moving stuff.
Yeah.
It emerged from that wood, went into the trees, and it just kind of spread from there. And so before we even really knew it was a problem, it was already working its way across the Midwest.
Okay.
And so over time, it's just continued to spread.
And it's been all around Oklahoma
It
for a
has.
number of years, right?
Yeah, and we found it in Oklahoma, like in 2016. Nothing ever happened with that find, but it's been in Arkansas, Texas, Missouri, and really all of the eastern states. It's just kind of started in that Detroit area and just went out, and it just spread in about as many directions as it could.
So why is this so bad for ash trees? Of course we love ash trees.
Yeah,
right?
we love ash trees. It was a great tree. It's great for basically yards, streets, everything. It handles a lot of our soils. It handles drought. So it was just a really good tree, and it actually looked really pretty. So a lot of people like to plant it. Now, the reason they started planting it really heavily was around the 60s or so. We had a lot of elms lining our streets. Dutch elm disease came in, wiped out the elms. And so the next thing we did was, okay, well, let's plant the next best street tree. Let's plant ash. Planted a whole bunch of ash. There's a lot of beautiful pictures of, streets lined with ash trees. And then now those trees are gone. The streets are bare. The sun's just hitting it. We lost a lot of shade. We lost a lot of just the prettiness of our streets. And all that was because another pest came in that focused on one species.
And cities have learned their lesson, I think, now that we're not doing monoculture, monocrops of trees anymore.
Yeah, so now a lot of cities, when they're planning, they really put a lot of thought in not just what the street's gonna look like now, but what it's gonna look like in 50 years type of thing. So they make rules where they'll say, we won't plant more than say 10% of one species. And so that way, if something like this happens again, they won't have a large, die off of all their trees. It'll just be a portion. And so they'll always have some canopy cover.
Okay, so let's talk about the emerald ash borer, sometimes abbreviated EAB.
EAB, yeah.
Let's talk about that insect and exactly what it's doing to the tree.
So what it's doing is, the beetle, it's a little beetle, fits on a penny. Its name is really accurate because it's emerald color. We call them jewel beetles because of that. And it bores into the wood of ash trees. So what it's doing is the adult will go and lay its eggs on the outside of the tree. In the bark. These eggs are tiny, really hard to see. They're also camouflaged. They look like bark. The egg hatches, the larva goes into the tree. Once it's past that bark, it's into the part of the tree that's moving water and nutrients up and down. Basically, it's like the vascular tissue.
Yeah, that cambium.
The cambium, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's where there's water, there's sugars, there's nutrients, everything that the leaves produce going down, everything that the roots pull up going up. So it's just really nutritious for these bugs. So they'll eat in there. And the way they feed, emerald ash borer will always feed in a S-shaped gallery. So it's like switchbacks.
Okay.
A lot of our native bugs will kind of just meander, but this always has that pattern. And eventually it's stopping the flow of all these nutrients and water. One bug, not going to cause an issue. Trees are big, bugs are small. But with the emerald ash borer, what it's doing is it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. It just overwhelms the tree. There's too many beetles, too many larvae. And eventually the tree just cannot move enough of that food up and down to be able to live. And eventually the tree starts to decline and then die.
And some of our native borers will do that similar thing, but they're in much smaller quantity, right? And they're kind of going to stress trees already, whereas this is attacking.
So our native things, native trees, native borers, they evolve together. They belong together. So the trees have ways to defend themselves against diseases and pests that it's used to. Once the tree starts getting stressed, it gets weaker and it can't defend itself. So that's when we see a lot of our native borers come in, or native diseases. So if you see a tree filled with holes, it doesn't mean it's emerald ash borer, but it means it could be. But if the tree was already, if we knew that that tree's always been declined, it's always been a little sickly, more likely it's just our native bugs hurrying up the death of a tree, which in nature would be, basically it's replacing that tree quicker so something new could take its place.
Right.
Now, yard, we don't necessarily want that nature element where it's killing a tree faster, but that's kind of the role of these native bugs. But the emerald ash borer, it doesn't care if the tree's healthy or sick. It sees an ash and it just sees a buffet.
So where will we identify most of those adults? Are they high up in the canopy, or are they down low?
Yeah.
Or are they crawling up the tree?
The adults, we can't ever really see the adults. I mean, they can be found, but they're small, they're green, and they're in the leaves. So trees, this is an ash tree behind me. It's a tall tree. You can't see a little bug up at it.
Okay.
So we rarely see the adults. It's usually the signs of the infestation that we see. But the adult will be happy spending its time up there eating leaves. It doesn't eat a lot of the leaf. It really doesn't cause any damage in the adult stage. Okay. It's all when it's that larva under the bark.
So what are the symptoms that we're looking for?
Yeah, so the initial symptoms, the early signs are going to be normal symptoms of stressed tree. And it's because all the water nutrient flow is disrupted. So the tree's going to start being stressed. One of the things we look at is dieback. So the tree behind me, we've got some dieback in the top. And if you think about where the sun's hitting, what's the most productive leaves on the tree, it's going to be the top ones. So if the top's dying back, that's a bad sign. Now, if you've got dieback at the bottom, that might just be the trees, it's not a good branch, the tree's losing it. But if those upper branches are dying, that's usually a sign that something's happening. Another response of trees whenever something is happening, whenever there's stressor, is what we call epicormic sprouting. It's leaves coming out of places that shouldn't be. So it might be the main stem, it might be some of those big branches, and it gives the tree kind of a bushy appearance. And that's the tree's response of something's wrong, I need to produce more sugar, I need to produce more food. The problem is those leaves aren't always in the best spot, and the way the branches come out or the twigs come out, it's not very strong, so it's easy to break apart in the wind or in ice storms. So it's not great for the tree, but it's the tree's oh no type of thing.
Okay, so the tree's under stress.
The tree's under stress.
The telltale sign.
The only real sign is if we could find that exit hole and we could find that gallery, or we find the beetle itself. So Oklahoma Forestry Services, we'll put up traps across the state. That's basically a big gluey box hanging in ash trees, and the beetles hit it. We check the traps, and that's how we found most of the other counties. Wagner County, we actually found a beetle on a leaf, but for the most part, it's our trapping programs. And then once we're starting to see that, we see these other signs of decline. And so then we're able to tell it's here. We knew that from the traps, but now we know how far the spread has been.
Okay, well, and I know woodpeckers a lot of times will go after borers.
Yeah.
Are woodpeckers going after this? You gotta tell us.
Woodpeckers love emerald ash borer.
Okay, great.
Because there's so many of these larvae in there. As they're getting older, those larvae, they get big, so it's a really juicy meal for the woodpeckers. Okay. So they will go to a tree and they'll start kind of going into the wood and finding it. Now, when they're moving up and down that tree, they're scraping off the bark. So this is what we call blonding. And it's basically removing the outer part of the bark, so it's just that really tight part to the tree. That doesn't hurt the tree, but it changes the color and the appearance, and it's something that you can really spot from a distance because it's just you see gray tree and then all of a sudden something different on it.
Okay, so it's sort of like that bronze sculpture that's
Yes.
designed by everybody.
Yeah, basically you keep rubbing it and
Yeah.
eventually it changes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's just a sign that woodpeckers have maybe been there and there might be a borer infestation
Yeah.
into that.
Now with that one, unlike our native borers, you know, if we've got a bunch of native borers that's going to attract that many woodpeckers, you usually see the decline in the tree.
Okay.
But emerald ash borer, the tree sometimes declines slower. So that might be one of the biggest indicators of the tree canopy looks great, but there's a lot of woodpecker activity. That's a huge sign for emerald ash borer.
Okay.
But it is all dependent on the birds being there. It doesn't always happen.
Right. So what's the exit hole look like that we're looking for?
Yeah, so the exit hole, it's tiny. It's 1/8 of an inch, and we say it's D-shaped. So it will have a really like straight line and then the curve.
Okay.
Now, the bugs, they don't really obey gravity like we think of it. They might come upside down, right side up, so that D could be facing any direction.
Okay.
But it's really just a small hole in the tree that's got that flat edge.
Okay.
Most of our other native borers that will go into an ash tree, it's either a perfect circle or kind of an oval, and they're usually bigger. Like if you could fit a pencil in it, it's going to be a native borer because these emerald ash borer, like I said, 1/8 of an inch, real small.
And so then they pupate and turn into the adults and they fly away?
Yeah.
That's how we keep this process going, this problem
And
going?
then it starts over. And they're really good flyers.
Okay.
So they're actually able to spread a decent distance on their own.
Okay.
But the biggest thing that got them to spread was a movement of firewood. Trees died, landowners cut it down, and they moved it to go camping. They left a little bit of wood for their next camper, you know, being nice. The bug emerged, it got a free trip. So that's one of our big takeaway messages. This bug, since it is a decent flyer, was always going to spread on its own, but at a much slower rate.
All right. Well, what are some methods of control if a homeowner's concerned about it? I mean, is there a control or do we just have to remove the tree if we find it?
There's a little control. It's a lot of how much the landowner wants to do. So sometimes landowners are just accepting that their tree is going to die. Sometimes they want to hurry it up and cut it down, put something new in its place. There are chemical treatments. So there's what's called a ground drench, which is basically pouring the chemical around the ground. The tree roots take it up, and it makes the tree poisonous to the beetle. Now, it's not going to fix the damage, but it will prevent more damage. Now, that ground drench, only moderately effective, but it's also real cheap. You could get the chemical at any box store and apply it yourself.
Okay.
More effective treatment is called injections, where you basically put that chemical directly into the tree. Because you're putting it right in, all of it's getting into the tree. It's going a lot quicker. Downside of that is you have to have specialized equipment and a what's called an applicator's license.
Okay.
So you really have to hire someone to do that. So it's a little more expensive, but that works for about 3 years.
Right. And what is the Forestry Service, both you guys and nationally, what are y'all doing to control this on a bigger scale?
So the first step is always just messaging of know what to look for and the don't move firewood message. But when it's in an area, what we've started doing is what's called biocontrol. We started looking in the emerald ash borer's native range to what is its predator. Found some parasitic wasps. It found that these 4 species of wasps only go for emerald ash borer. They're not going to target our natives. They're not going to cause an issue on their own. So we're releasing these wasps with the goal that they will start controlling the population. They're never going to get rid of it because that would be mutual destruction. If you get rid of all the emerald ash borer, the wasp has nothing to parasitize. But it brings it into balance. It basically is creating that same balance that our native bugs have.
Okay, well, it sounds like you guys are on the case and we're getting the word out, right?
Yeah.
So should anybody who has a concern, should they contact you guys or?
Yeah, our goal, Oklahoma Forestry Services, is we're here to help landowners with their trees. So if any landowner ever has a question, they could reach out, they could contact us, contact OSU Extensions. You know, these are all people who, they work with trees, they work with landowners, and between us, we're able to find the best person for what their need is.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing this with us, Deiter.
Hi, I'd like to introduce you to our new Wildflower Meadow. We planted this in the fall. We just use a seed spreader and spread the seed over this. And we're just really pleased with how beautifully the wildflowers have sprouted. Let me tell you a story about why we needed to do this and what happened here. About 15 years ago, there was construction done here, and this whole area was cleared. and native plants were planted. But then, because of people leaving the university and other reasons, the area wasn't maintained. Lacebark elms were along this area, and they spread their seeds into this area. And after a few years, we realized, oh my gosh, we have millions upon millions of lacebark elm seedlings coming up in this area. We've come through with a forestry mulcher, and we have mulched this whole area right down to the ground. And then we came in, after that ground had been disturbed with the forestry mulcher, we came in and spread the wildflower seeds in the fall. Now, we've used a wildflower mix here that has natives and non-natives. You can purchase a wildflower mix that would be exclusively natives. We didn't do that. We have other wildflower meadows here at the garden that are exclusively natives, but in this one we chose to use a readily available seed mix that has a mix. They did sprout really, really well. Now we have the challenge of maintaining this. Just because it's wildflowers doesn't mean it's no maintenance. There's no such thing as a no maintenance landscape. We have to come in here now and, first off, take care of the lace sparks that are re-sprouting. That forestry mulcher came in and cut them all down to the ground, but it didn't necessarily kill them. They are now re-sprouting from the stumps. And so we're going to come in with an herbicide and just very directly kill just those lacebark elm sprouts so that we can maintain this as a meadow. So, we have not irrigated this. We have not had much rain this spring, so we're very pleased at how well this looks, how well these have sprouted up with almost no rain. So that is a good thing that this is maintaining on its own and looking so beautiful on its own, but it's not no maintenance. We will have to come in here to maintain this as a meadow. The other thing that's really important is when you have a meadow, a wildflower meadow, is to leave the plants alone while they produce seed heads. Let those seeds dry and fall to the ground so that they will be next year's flowers. As a matter of fact, some people say wildflower gardens aren't good until the second or third year because it takes some time for the seeds to germinate and for those flowers to bloom. So this is our new wildflower meadow, just planted it in the fall. So this is not multiple years old, this is brand new. We wanted to keep the soil from eroding, so we wanted to establish something in here very quickly. So we just spread that wildflower seed, and we're really pleased with how it turned out. We think it's beautiful. Now we're going to keep maintaining it, keep the lace barks from resprouting. Maybe we'll find other invasives that we don't like and we'll get rid of them as well. But no such thing as no maintenance. Gardens always require work, but gardens always have wonderful rewards.
Today we're back in the garden to talk with Mark Turner about some wildlife that we might be finding more in our lawn this time. Moles and gophers. They might literally be popping up this summer, right?
That's right, that's right.
So can you help us identify the difference, first of all, between a mole and a gopher?
That's right. So here in Oklahoma, we have the eastern mole, and then we actually have two different species of pocket gopher. But again, the recognition of the type of damage they cause and the control methods don't really matter by species.
Okay.
And so generally with moles, you're going to see damage from both the mounds. They're going to have a more symmetrical round that's shaped almost like a mountain.
Okay.
There's generally going to be fewer mounds, but what a lot of the damage comes from with moles is seeing the tunnels. And so you'll see strips of dead grass that just look like a tunnel. They might lead to and from the mounds. And so those are just foraging areas. The moles are actually eating insects and earthworms and grubs under the ground.
Okay.
So I tell folks, don't necessarily jump to controlling them automatically. You know, if it's in an area that you can put up with some of that damage, they can provide some great pest control. They also aerate the soil and help with soil fertility.
Okay.
But if they are causing damage, there's certainly ways that we can help with that. For pocket gophers, You're generally going to see more mounds just because they're usually in a little bit larger populations compared to moles, which tend to be a little bit more solitary. Pocket gophers, the mounds themselves are the primary cause of damage. You'll also see some damage from them eating roots of plants as well as leaves of plants.
Okay, so
certainly,
they will eat our plants.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they can directly eat the plants.
Okay.
And so most of the time, the easiest way to identify pocket gopher mounds as opposed to moles are with pocket gophers, those mounds on top of the ground are going to be more fan-shaped, so they're a little bit less symmetrical. And you'll also see a plug of dirt where that pocket gopher has essentially plugged his tunnel. And so if you look, you'll see a little cylinder that's usually depressed underneath the top level of that mound.
Okay.
And that's a telltale sign that that's a pocket gopher. And so that will then tell you what kind of control methods and specifically what kind of traps you might want to use to control it.
Okay, and are the gopher moles typically a little bit larger? Because it's a larger animal usually, right? Is that...
They can be a little bit larger. I wouldn't go by size though. I typically am just thinking about the shape of it. And then if it has that plug, that's a telltale sign. It's not a mole, it's a gopher.
All right, now, and so, you know, a lot of times they can cause problems, especially in something like an area where we're wanting recreation, right? Whether it's a public park or your yard, you're running, and you can turn an ankle on those holes, right?
That's right.
So how do, you know, yes, they're maybe beneficial eating some of those grub worms, but how do we get rid of these if they're causing a problem?
So with either one, they're causing problems. We don't recommend repellents. Those are generally ineffective. There's a lot of them on the market, but we generally don't recommend that. The primary thing that I recommend for both is going to be trapping.
Okay.
But again, you need to pick your type of trap based on what you have. So it's really important to identify which animal is causing problems.
Yeah.
For moles, we're typically going to think about using harpoon traps or scissor style traps. Most folks use harpoon traps. They're relatively easy to set on the soil surface, just right over the tunnel. But you can also, again, use a scissor style trap that would go in the tunnel itself.
Okay.
For gophers, we're oftentimes going to use a spring style trap, and that actually goes down into the tunnel itself. So you'll have to dig the tunnel out and then put the trap in and then cover that tunnel back over, because if the gopher's going along and he recognizes, oh, there's sunlight here, he's not going to go there anymore.
Okay.
They're trying to stay underground, to stay hidden from predators, and that's also where they're foraging. And so those you're generally going to, either trap you're going to have to check daily, and I just recommend continue trapping until you see the damage stop, or you stop catching animals, and at that point you can obviously smooth things out and reseed those parts of your lawn that were damaged.
So if you've caught one mole, you might have caught the culprit, but you might be catching more than one gopher, right?
Correct. I certainly would say just keep an eye on things if you catch one.
Okay.
Because again, you might only have one, but if you've got a bunch of mounds all over the place and it's gophers, you may have to catch more than that. There are some poisons that you can use, but I generally don't recommend those, especially for folks that are going to be working around areas where maybe their pets are going, or they have kids that might be using those areas. For people just working in their garden or around their home, trapping is very effective, and it's just a safer way to do things and not fool with the poisons.
Well, and I guess I've heard traps are one of the best ways to go also, but one of the key things is getting it in the right place, right? So how do we know where there's active tunnels to put those traps?
That's right. So generally what I'll recommend folks do is to actually go and depress some of those tunnel areas, especially with moles. This works very well.
Okay.
And if you go out the next day and see that they've opened it back up, then you know that it's being used frequently. With gophers, generally, you're going to want to place it around active tunnels, but most of the time with gophers, I'm just going to recommend getting several traps, just putting it in the area with the freshest damage, and then putting several traps in those areas. That's going to be the best way to catch them.
Okay. Is there certain environments that favor these versus others, like irrigation?
Right. So certainly you might see irrigation helping things. Especially with moles, you could see them maybe moving into an area where irrigation is promoting more grubs. But generally, especially with pocket gophers, the soil texture is going to have the biggest influence. They really like those areas with more sandy soil, that more coarse soil for them to dig in, as opposed to areas with a little bit finer soil.
So of course soil texture doesn't change that readily in a yard. So if you've had gophers, you're likely going to have to experience them again, maybe?
That's exactly right. Yeah. If you know that you've had them in an area, you're much more likely to see them come into that area again. Certainly the control methods that we have are good, but be vigilant, and if you don't want to have them in an area, it's best to take care of them early on after you detect them.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing this information with us.
Absolutely.
as always, if you have a question about today's show, feel free to reach out to your local county OSU Extension office or leave us a comment on social media. There are many great horticulture activities this time of year. Be sure and consider some of these events in the weeks ahead. Join us next week as we look at 2 local conservation projects in our state, right here on Oklahoma Gardening.
I just want to say Tulsa. Somebody's going to be like, I know where you are.
Yeah. That's in Tulsa.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure to visit our website at oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. Join in on Facebook and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows, as well as individual segments, on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. Tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio garden, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater gem. We would like to thank our generous underwriters, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, and Shape Your Future, a program of the Tobacco Settlement Endowment Trust. Additional support is also provided by the Tulsa Garden Club, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Tulsa Garden Center, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, and the Tulsa Herb Society.